I'm going to start the Easter story actually with the burial of Jesus because it pertains to the principal characters of the Easter story in Luke. They're the women who go to the tomb. Hear these words starting in chapter 23, verses 50, and then continuing in chapter 24 through verse 12. Now there was a good and righteous man named Joseph, though he was a member of the council, had not agreed to the plan of action, that he came from Arimathea and was waiting expectantly for the kingdom of God. And this man came to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. And when he took it down, he wrapped it in a linen cloth and laid it in a rock-hewn tomb that no one had laid in. It was the day of preparation for the Passover, and the Sabbath was beginning. And the women who had come with him from Galilee followed, and they saw the tomb and how the body was laid. And then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. But on the Sabbath they rested according to the commandments. On the first day of the week, early at dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared, and they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. And when they went in, they found no body. Whilst they were perplexed about this, but suddenly 2 men of dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, he is risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and crucified, that on the 3rd day he would rise again." And then they remembered his words and returned from the tomb, and they told this to the 11 and to the rest. Now this was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who were told to the apostles. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen clothes by themselves, and he went home. He was amazed at what had happened. I have preached the story a number of times in my career of different things have happened. You know, you kind of reflect upon the world in which you live in, and you see yourself, where are we at Easter? Something caught my eye this time that I've probably read 100 times before, and that is it lists the women, 3 in particular who have names, and then there's the others, the other women. That doesn't say how many people actually showed up at the tomb the first time, this group of women, but there were 3 notables and then the others. And I often wonder in Bible stories about the others, the nameless people who participate in the stories and who are significant because they witnessed things, but they weren't given a name. They weren't quite known well enough to say, oh yeah, it was Jane and Lisa and Jacqueline. They were there too. But no, it's just, who was there? Well, I don't remember. Well, let's just say the other women were there. So they become nondescript really quickly. You ever been to a party where you can't remember everybody was there? You start going down the list of people and you go, and then there were those people and they were there. Well, who were they? Well, I don't really remember. But they were there. They witnessed it all. They saw it. They thought it was a great time. But the exact people are kind of missing. This story, the story of Jesus' resurrection, has always been kind of the big stumbling block in Christianity because at some point along the way, someone's going to say, well, prove it. And at that point, you've kind of lost them if you're trying to do the proof text of things. There was a time in my life in ministry where I was really interested in the historiography of all of this and read several books about this from people who were kind of doubters and people who were really believed. And at some point along the way, they don't gel up because the story is one of witness and of acceptance rather than a story of factual happenings. This is what happened in this order, and this is the outcome. The other thing that it happens to deal with that a lot of people, brush over really quickly is death. Death is the main event out of this thing prior to today. And too often, we just kind of zoom through that and get to Easter because it's a lot happier time than to deal with the death of Jesus. And I am somewhat concerned about that because actually we're all on that trajectory ourselves. You know, we all have this limited time span that we're going to be here and do things and to be exciting among people around us. And at some point, we'll have to face that ourselves. And I know everybody in this room has felt dead in their life. I have. Laying in bed, wondering about what's coming next, not feeling like I have the power to do anything about it. It's beyond my control. I'm just living through it, and I feel dead about it because I don't have any agency. I don't have any way to make things happen for my own benefit. I'm on a ride that doesn't have a good ending that I see, or at least doesn't have anything that I can hang on to with hope. Everybody's had that. I mean, it's something that we have all dealt with at some point in our lives, whether it's an illness that has happened or a death of someone we loved or we've lost a job. There's a whole list of things you can have to have that dead feeling in your life, to be there and singularly feel that you are alone in the universe and that there's really very little that you can do to change the situations that you're in, and the outcomes are uncertain, and you're not sure where you're going to be out of it. It's death. You don't have to be died and in the ground to be dead. There are lots of people in the world who are. And I'm not talking about being dead because they don't have a faith stance or anything like that. I'm talking about being dead because they've lost hope, and that they don't have any sense of where they're going to go except the sun's going to rise up the next day, and they're going to have to deal with the events of the next day, and then the next day after that, and the next day after that. And when you think about the future, it just is exhausting. And there's very little that's going to come out of it that is empowering. And that is the death of Jesus. You know, that's the death of Jesus, that kind of loss of empowerment. Someone has done something that you couldn't do anything about, hung on a cross, died in a tomb, rolled stone, the end. That's death. The amazing thing about God, though, I think, and this is why the resurrection story is so powerful to me anyway, the amazing story about God in all of this situation is that God never gives up on life. Hasn't given up on life on earth, continues to bloom each spring, even where places where it seems to go into neutral or decline to the point where you can't see any life around you. God has never given up on people's lives, even those who live the hopeless life of dead. There's the possibility that God will bring someone or something into their life that will be transformative. And there's even a greater possibility that the person can find something within their life that will be transformative for themselves, and if the things are really happening, transformative for others. And that the others part, like our story itself, is really where we fit in. We are part of the Christian story of the others. The people who showed up at the tomb who didn't really have a name attached to them, that has been the church from that point forward. It's made up of a whole bunch of others, other people, people who were there, but we don't really know their names. People who followed, but they lived their life, it was significant, but we really don't know who they are. There are people who have made a big difference in the world around them, primarily in other people's lives. Not that they've created mountains or scaled political heights or changed legislation or were great business people or whatever. It doesn't matter. But they made a difference. They are the others of Christianity. They made a difference in people's lives, and that's the resurrection story. The resurrection story is that God continues to work out in us, in bringing people into our lives who give us life again. And for us who are part of the Christian community, we hold that life for ourselves. The light of Christ, that God doesn't give up on Jesus Why would God give up on us? Why not believe that the power that raised Jesus from the dead is really our power too? We are the others who saw that resurrection event and have lived it out. Some people have lived it out in miracle ways. There are people in this congregation who decided that they were going to pull up stakes and go live in the Congo. A guy named Dyer, who was a member of this church, who was an MD, got this congregation to sponsor him to go to the Congo, I think in the 1920s. And he set up a little clinic there that made a whole difference for a lot of people there, who was able to give medical to him. The thing was about it, though, it wrecked his health. He was there for maybe 7 or 8 years, and he had to come back to Pomona. And at that point, the congregation took care of him, because between malaria that he got there and other tropical diseases, he didn't really recover fully from that. And he was able to manage okay, but the congregation that sent him out to do this work was the same congregation that took care of him when he came back. Those other people who made a difference in both ways, in sending out and in coming back. This Easter, I hope that you count yourself as those other people, those people who make a difference in other people's lives, those people who invest themselves in other people's living. And you can be a resurrection agent yourself, transformative. You may be the action of God to another. You may be the person who brings new life in the midst of death. Hallelujah. Christ is risen.